Hey everybody, Jane here, and we are doing my wrap up for January 2025. It's crazy. January felt like a really long month, but also like I can't believe it's over already. I feel like we were still just having Christmas like a week ago. So in January, I actually had a really good month. I read or attempted to read a total of 17 books, most of which I actually talked about in my mid-month wrap up. So I'm going to go over all the books with you and I'll link my mid-month wrap up below. And the ones that I haven't talked about, we will talk about in some detail. All right, so for my wrap ups, I usually go by rating. So I'm going to start with the 4 books I DNF'd this month because I just was not able to do anything that I wasn't into. And I had several books that just were not hitting for me this month. The first one of those, which I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, was Tripping for number 68. The next one was Lord of Eternal Night, which I also talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. And Gwen and Art Are Not in Love, which was also in my mid-month wrap-up. The one that wasn't in my mid-month wrap-up, however, was Miss Jane. This book I actually got fairly into before I DNF'd it. So this is about a little girl who is born with some issues in her girl parts. So when she's born, they're not sure if she's a girl or if she's a boy. They're pretty sure she's a girl, but things don't look right. She has bowel and bladder issues. She's incontinent because of her bits. This is the early 1900s, so there's not a lot of options medically or surgically to fix her. And this book, what I thought I was getting into was a book about a woman dealing with kind of being a woman in the times when your value as a woman was largely on the pleasure you could give and the reproductive value that you had as having parts. That's not really what I got, but that's what I thought I was getting into. I was hoping that this book was going to be, a mature woman trying to date in the early 1900s and having the struggle of, I am not, able to relationship normally because of my parts. And that's not at all what I got. This book actually starts when Miss Jane is a baby, and I actually didn't get much beyond, I think she was 7 or 8 at the time that I just DNF'd this. This book is a lot less about Jane and a lot more about other people, especially the doctor who is treating her. And the doctor who is treating her, in my opinion, is a bit of a creeper. So we had him like lusting after her teenage sister, which was pretty gross. And everybody just is kind of bad. We had her teenage sister, Jane's teenage sister, like have her go with her while she has relations with a boy so that she has a witness that she has relations with the boy so that she can try to get money to run away from home by faking a pregnancy or getting pregnant. It was a hot mess. And just everybody being gross was too much. And the lustiness after children was just not for me. So yeah, I ended up deciding that this book was a miss. And I talked a little bit more about it in the reading vlog I did for the month of January, the Buzzwordathon. So if you want more of my thoughts, you can have them there. This book just was not for me. All right, so next we're doing my 3 stars. And funny enough, all of my 3 stars were at the second half of the month. So we're going to talk about all my 3 stars. I didn't have any 3 stars at the beginning of the month. At the beginning of the month, it was like everything I loved or hated. Like I DNF'd or I really loved it and it was a 4 or 5 star. But unfortunately, the second half of the reading month was not so good. All right, so the first one we have to talk about is Huckleberry Finn. This book is a classic. You all know what it's about. Huckleberry Finn is a boy and he is struggling at home. His father is an alcoholic, so he fakes his own death and goes down the river to try to run away and start a new life for himself. As he's doing so, he meets escaped slave Jim, and they go on adventures together. This book is a classic for a reason. It just wasn't for me. Firstly, as a modern day reader, the excessive use of the N-word was a lot too much for me to handle, just being honest. I did do it as an audiobook, which made it even worse on that front. I also felt very frustrated with the story by the end of it. I would say we were like bordering on a 4-star up until about the last 2 hours of the audiobook. And then I was so mad at Tom Sawyer, who comes into play later in the book, that I was just angry. And I just wanted the book to be over so that these people would stop being stupid. And like, I think it's really meant to be cute and funny and haha, look at these little boys being adorable and ridiculous. But that's not the experience I had with it, and I really, really got frustrated with the crazy antics of these children. And I think this is more of like, I think I'm the wrong audience because I'm a 40-year-old woman. And I think this book is really meant for like 15-year-old boys because it's very much, haha. It's told by Huckleberry Finn in his point of view and is very much his silly adventures and the things that he's doing that seem to him to make a lot of sense. But as an older woman, I'm like, you know, they talk about like the protagonists who are too dumb to live. Like there were moments that Huckleberry is just too dumb to live. And like, yes, he's a child. And so he's allowed to be too dumb to live sometimes, but it was just like, oh my gosh, it drove me crazy. There were moments that I really appreciated the conversations about slavery. And there were also moments where I just was like, if these people were real, everything that's happening is terrible and I am not having a good time. And that was just kind of the vibe that, especially at the end of the book, it was stressful. So at the end of the book, I don't want to give too many spoilers. I know it's a really old book, but you know, not everybody has read classics. But at the end of the book, they are trying to help Jim escape. Because, you know, Jim is an escaped slave, but they're trying to help him escape. He has been recaptured. And Tom Sawyer is helping Huckleberry, and Tom Sawyer is just this fantastically imaginative kid who's read way too many books and is like, hey, we have to make this book worthy. So you have to do all of these ridiculous things. We should be able to solve this problem of getting Jim helping Jim escape in 2 seconds. Like literally, we just open the door and let him go. But instead, we're making him sleep with snakes. We're making him use a blanket and drawing blood on our blanket to do secret messages. We're, you know, almost choking him by putting stuff in his food that he can escape with, but he's not really going to escape with it because we're going to do all that. It was so frustrating. And like, this is like 2 hours of the book. It was not quick. Jim must have felt like it was taking forever. It was like a 3-week thing that these kids are plotting to help Jim escape when all they really had to do was open the door and be like, see ya. And I was just stressed. I found it stressful and I was not having a good time. So yeah, Huckleberry Finn, 3-star. Understand why it's a classic. I like the things it has to say about slavery and the anti-slavery message, but oh boy, it was not for me. All right, the next 3-star we had was All the Little Liars. This is a Aurora Teagardner mystery. I think I've tried reading one other Aurora Teagardner mystery and ended up DNFing it. I just liked this okay, and I won't really be continuing on in the series in any meaningful way. So in this one, we have Aurora, who is recently married and recently pregnant, which I did enjoy. I did enjoy all the pregnancy stuff because, like, I loved when I was pregnant with my babies, and so, like, having that mom energy was lovely. The mystery happens of her brother has come to live with her. Her brother is a 15-year-old teenager whose parents are getting divorced. And her brother, along with several other children in town, disappear. And so Aurora has to go figure out what happened to them. I was really invested in the characters, but I the mystery didn't really work for me, and so I found myself very frustrated by the end of it. Particularly the reveal. There was just a lot of things that people were acting very dumbly, and I was struggling with that. Um, the the end, I'm not gonna get into reveals here, but like the ending didn't land for me. So while I enjoyed a lot of stuff, by about the halfway point when I realized what was happening, I was not really having as much fun anymore. And it was like too light. It was light enough that it felt like a cozy, but then not light enough to really be a cozy. So the vibes were kind of weird. I I liked it, but I didn't love it. And yeah, it was kind of mid. I really did not enjoy where we went, but some of the journey there was fine. And Aurora was fine, and I enjoyed hearing about her pregnancy and her mystery writer husband. The next book that got a 3 from me was a manga, and this is A Cat from Our World. This is about a cat in our world who goes to another world, and he is bigger than everybody. He becomes the friend of slash familiar of a witch. She believes she has summoned him, and they're having these little adventures together. It was fine. I understood most of what was going on with manga. Sometimes I don't fully understand what the author's trying to do, and I felt like I got this. I just wasn't interested. I was interested enough to not DNF it, but like just barely, and it was just fine. I wouldn't say don't read this, but it didn't do anything exciting for me. It was just kind of meh. And the last 3-star read we have is Blood on the Tracks, Volume 17. This is the last of the Blood on the Tracks books, and it wasn't bad. I won't even say I felt like it let me down. I'm not sure that it had the punch I wanted after following the entire series. So this is the last of the Blood on the Tracks books, and when we started this series, I was really into them. So in the first book, we have, I think his name is Sai, and he is going on a family outing, and he witnesses his mother push his cousin over a cliff, and craziness ensues. And I thought we were getting one type of book from the beginning, and it was really, really interesting. And I would say, like, I don't remember exactly when it is, but like we got a time jump at some point, and after the time jump, I was a lot less invested in what was happening. So the early part of the story is kind of what happens after this incident with his cousin. And then this second half of the story, when he's an adult, is more him processing it and trying to reconcile the fact that his mother is a complicated person, but is also his mother. And I just liked the earlier parts of this book a lot better. It was more horror, it was more crazy and fun, and this just was it was kind of quiet, but not in a way that for me felt super satisfying. So I just felt a little bit let down by it. I'm glad the series is over. I'm not sad I read it. I don't know if I would have necessarily wanted to go on this entire journey based on how the last few books ended up. Like, I don't know if I would recommend the series, like, especially if you are really loving the vibes of the first book. I feel like the series doesn't deliver, but I really enjoyed the first bit of it when he was really dealing with what his mother had done and trying to figure out like why and what happened. And I just felt like it could have done so many really cool, strong things, and it just kind of let me down by the end. So a little bit disappointed, but glad I'm done with that series. All right, so now we're talking about my 4-star reads, and all but one I read during the first part of the month. The ones I read earlier this month were Butcher and the Wren, A Christmas Carol, For Love or Money, and Blood on the Tracks 16. And all of those were in my video for the mid-month wrap-up. So if you want to know what I said about them, please check that out. The new one for the second half of the month was Murder at Sissingham. This was actually a buddy read that I read with fellow author Gower Bat, and I actually enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I was. So we got it free on Kindle, and I believe it might be a perma-free one. So if this sounds good, check it out. Make sure it's still perma-free. But I really enjoyed it, surprisingly more than I expected, and may continue in the series. We have a Christie-esque closed door mystery. So we have Charles, who has been away for, I believe it's 8 years in Africa doing some mining, I believe. And he has come home to visit. And his best buddy is like, hey, we're going to spend a week or whatever at a house party that is being hosted by your ex-fiance. And his ex-fiance's name is Rosamund. So they're like, do you want to come along? And at first he's like, but then he's like, well, I do want to see Rosamund. I mean, we had a mutual breakup. It was fine. I wonder how she's doing. I hope her life is going well. And then also like the friends that they're with, he's kind of got a crush, I think, on the sister. So they go to this house party for his old girlfriend, and several people are there. So besides his friends, you have I believe she's like the ward of the ex-fiance and her husband. Her husband's name's Neville. So the ward that they're taking care of, she's not a child, but I'd say she's like an older teenager, maybe early 20s. We have Neville's brother and sister-in-law. We have Neville's solicitor. We have all of the staff in the house. And they're a couple days into this house party, I do believe, when there is a murder. Neville, who is the husband of the ex-fiance, has been found murdered in his study. And we have to figure out, or Charles, who is our point of view character, is trying to figure it out with the help of Rosamund's cousin, and Angela. She's like the main character in the story, but like she plays a very small role considering she's not a POV character. Like it was interesting, but also like kind of classic Christie, where you have that character who is not actually largely involved in the action. Like they're not the detective or anything. They're just along for the ride. So the cousin and Charles are trying to figure out this murder, and it was interesting. So a couple things I will say. I love the Christie energy of it. It was a fun read. It did not shock or surprise me. I knew really early on. I knew probably even before we found the body who had done it. I didn't necessarily know all the whys, but I was pretty sure early on I knew what was going on. And that didn't detract because I was having a good time. But yeah, if you want a mystery that is like, oh, who done it, twists, that's not this. But I also read a lot of Christie's, and so sometimes I guess who it is, but it was still a lovely time. And especially if you can get it to read for free on Kindle, try it, see if you enjoy it. I definitely would be interested to check out more in the series. Although since Charles is not going to be a POV character anymore, I assume, I'm not sure how future books are going to go for me. I did enjoy Charles and kind of the situation, so I'm not sure how I'll feel about future books, but I'd definitely be willing to try them because it was good vibes. All right, so now we're on to our 5 stars, and most of these 5 stars I also read at the beginning of the month. So the ones that I already read that are in my mid-month wrap-up are Two Can Play, Barbarian's Treasure, and Barbarian's Mate. So my other video will tell you what I thought about that. The last book that I had that was a 5-star that I haven't talked about before is Family. I did talk about this a little bit in the reading vlog I did, and I may end up doing a separate review because this was so much to unpack, but it was so good. So this is about, it's about India. And India is an actress. And she was recently in a movie where she plays a birth mother who gave up her daughter for adoption, and then like over the years has struggled with addiction and meets her birth daughter in rehab, and coming together heals them. India is a adoptive mother, and we find out pretty quickly on also a birth mother, and is not real thrilled with the representation of the movie. And so she kind of comments out about the movie in the public, and now everybody hates her. The studio is mad at her because she kind of called the movie bad representation. All of the people in the adoption circles online are attacking her. Everybody is upset. Now, initially, they don't know that she's a birth mother, but then her birth daughter speaks out and is like, hey, that's a birth mother. She can talk about her opinions about whether this reputation or representation is good or not. And this book really just explores family and family dynamics. So we have two timelines. We have the current India and what she's going through with the pushback from this movie and her feedback that it wasn't great representation. And we also have her, how she became a birth mother and her story. I would say in the modern timeline, her adopted daughter, Fig, is more the main character. We have a lot more of Fig kind of telling the story and being kind of the main character in the current timeline. And then in the past timeline, it's India. I really liked Fig. I thought Fig was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed that story happening in the present. I liked the backstory. It was fine. There was a couple things in this book that initially, it happened and I'm like, I don't know about that. But then the characters did the whole, I don't know about that. And I was like, okay, you know what? I can go with that. If you're calling it out and being like, I understand why you as a reader had that reaction. And yes, you're supposed to have that reaction because all the characters are having that reaction too. I was like, okay, I can go with this. But I just love this. This had some beautiful quotes. It had beautiful discussions about adoption. It is written by an adoptive mother as well. Now, the one thing I will say about that is I am online in a lot of circles involving adoption because I hope to adopt someday. And one of the challenges is having a book about adoption by an adoptive mother that is like family is family, which is kind of the message of this book, is that families are complex and messy, but that doesn't make them less beautiful. I wish this story would have come from a birth mother or from an adoptee, because one of the things we're seeing a lot in adoption circles right now is discussion about, adoptees not feeling like adoption is a good thing. And I have a feeling that it is a vocal minority that feel that way. But again, in adoption circles, adoption is often not seen as a very positive thing from the children who are adopted, who are speaking out online. So the fact that a adoptive mother is the one writing the story, as opposed to a birth mother who could have, the character is a birth mother and an adoptive mother. But I do think there's a question of, part of the messaging of this book is that adoption is fine. Adoption can look a lot of different ways, and not everybody is miserable from adoption. And some kids are better off adopted, some birth mothers are better off. Everybody can be better off from adoption is kind of, in a point, the message of this. And it felt like the author is almost saying, I'm so tired of hearing all the bad stories of adoption. Every time we hear an adoption story, it's things have gone terribly wrong. Could we get some nice adoption portrayals in the media? And again, I think the complexity is, I think we have in the past. I think we had a lot of, like Anne of Green Gables. That is a very positive, beautiful adoption story. All the Little House on the Prairie stuff, positive, beautiful adoption story. But for the show anyway. I don't know if there was adoption in the book, but Albert's adopted in the movie, and I believe the Ingalls have 2 other adopted children in the in the TV show, but I can't remember their names. But Albert always stood out to me. But I think we've had really positive representation of adoption historically, and I think we're getting some of the more negative adoption stories now as we have social media, as adoptees are talking out, as we're just getting different sides of the coin. And I don't think there's any wrong way or bad way to tell a story as long as it's authentic. And I also think everybody in the adoption triad is allowed to speak. But I feel like there is maybe a little bit of an adoptive mother speaking for birth mothers and adopted children in this. And I would have liked to have a birth mother come out and say, it didn't ruin my life to have a child and give them up. It made my life better, and my child's better for it, and I couldn't have parented them as good. And that is kind of the messaging in this book. But the fact that it is written by an adoptive mother, at least there's somebody in the adoption triad, which is great. But I think it feels a little bit complicated that the messaging is from an adoptive mother and not a birth mother and not an adoptee. And those are stories that are being told, but they're not stories that that person has experienced in those roles, if that makes sense. So I do think that's worth noting. But for me, the book itself was lovely. There was some wonderful quotes. There was great energy. There was a lot of interesting discussion, including the discussion of, hey, adoption is not always just a tragedy. And sometimes it's the right thing for the right people. And I do like that messaging, and I really enjoyed this book as a whole. So yeah, those were all of the things that I read or tried to read in the month of January. What was your best read and your worst read of January? Leave it in the comments below. Also, if you've read any of these books, please tell me your thoughts on them. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Pictures and patterns put into words that stream across the page.